I wanted to do something that just had a few tracks and they were all long and really fleshed out. And we dug in there, kind of like a live gig, where a tune could be 20 minutes or something like that. So we want to do that. And I was kind of thinking, as a classical clarinetist originally, a guy who didn't touch a saxophone until I got to college, I was thinking more of like a classical tune that would have 3 or 4 movements to it. And that's kind of where this started going. And that's where we landed with the clever Storied 11, kind of that play on, hey, tune in tonight, Storied 11, since it's my 11th album.
It's Mike Jeffers, Chicago Jazz Magazine, chicagojazz.com, and welcome to another episode of Around Town. Today we've got saxophonist Shawn Maxwell. He's got a brand new release, Story at 11. He's got a release party coming up April 14th at the venue in Aurora. This is his 11th recording. Of course, we've had Shawn on. He is not a stranger to this show, but we haven't done it in virtually. We did virtually one time, I think, but he's been down to the hot dog stand. So he's one of the originals. We all love Shawn Maxwell. So Shawn, thanks so much for being here and congratulations on this great recording.
First of all, thanks for having me, man. It's always a pleasure to be on here talking with you. I always appreciate it. It's always fun. Story at 11, it came out of 2020, the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, when we were just we didn't know what was going on. So like everybody sitting at home and just practicing and composing and figuring out what the heck's going to happen. Really, this album came about because my several albums before that were a lot of tunes, original tunes, but shorter length, anywhere from like 1 minute to like 3 or 4 minutes. It wasn't like a long one digging into it. And actually in the beginning of 2021, I put out an album that had like almost 30 other musicians where we all recorded our parts at home during the pandemic. And there was a lot of tracks, but the longest track on there is like 2.5, 3 minutes. So what I was thinking, this was going towards the end of 2021 when we started to record this, is I wanted to do something the exact opposite. I wanted to do something that just had a few tracks and they were all long and really fleshed out. And we dug in there, kind of like a live gig, where a tune could be 20 minutes or something like that. So we want to do that. And I was kind of thinking, as a classical clarinetist originally, a guy who didn't touch a saxophone until I got to college, I was thinking more of like a classical tune that would have 3 or 4 movements to it. And that's kind of where this started going. And that's where we landed with the clever Storied 11, kind of that play on, hey, tune in tonight, Storied 11, since it's my 11th album. And what we did is I composed this thing in 4 movements, and each movement is a part in the journey of like a story or, excuse me. I use hopefully I don't get sued by this. I use Wizard of Oz as kind of a like an example for it. Like the beginning, appointment with, originally I was calling it appointment with wizard, like we're off to see the wizard, this is the start of our journey. And then like the second one, Eternal Rift, is where you get that first thing of like, oh man, this is kind of hard and this kind of sucks and I maybe want to quit this journey. And then Near Surrender is where you're like at your bottom, you're like, or that point in every Rocky movie where he's beat up and you're like, oh, I can't go on. And then Answer and Arrival is kind of reaching the end of that journey where you got through it and kind of resolves and ties it all together. And throughout all of those, it's each track is about 10 minutes long, and we have a lot of improvisation in each, but I have a lot of composition that ties each track together, whether it be like chord structure or time signature. And just, I don't know, it's one of those things that you definitely can listen to each track individually. It stands on its own, but when you put it together, at least in my thoughts, it tells more of a story that ties together.
Well, it's interesting to me because doing it in movements, you probably could have broken a couple of these movements into like 2 tunes, I would imagine, or something like that. But I like the fact because it like listening to Eternal Rift, we were talking about it a little bit before, there's a lot of interaction going on. I know that you're staying within chords and within the time signature and things like that, but there's a lot of interaction going on. And because the movement, you're not rushing to get to the end of a tune, I feel like it organically, unlike a lot of like recorded music, organically, it feels like it's a live gig because you guys aren't rushing to get to the end of everybody's thoughts. You're letting things breathe. You're letting things organically grow. And when you were in the studio recording this, I mean, you must have like 5 or 6 takes of each movement, I would imagine, or I don't even know how you would put it together. Or do you just do it all at once and just say, let's just do this movement today? And you just play it and just let everything just flow. I mean, because there's no way to go back and do overdubbing or any of that on here. This is like true playing, I think, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, we decided we wanted this to be like a live gig, and we wanted to approach it that way. So the first thing we did, we recorded at Electrical Audio, and we decided no headphones. We're doing this all live in the room, and we were just in like a little kind of box circle facing each other. And so that right there made it more, at least for me, I hate wearing headphones and improvising. It just, it felt more like a live gig, which feels to me more natural, as no offense to recording with headphones and everything, but it just felt better. And excuse me, we don't have a lot of extra takes. I mean, there were a few, but I mean, we got what we wanted, if not on the second or third take. I mean, we just kind of went in. We knew we recorded it in order, because I wanted just us to feel that even when we're recording that. I know maybe saying it out loud, that sounds kind of pretentious.
No, it makes sense, is what it sounds like. It sounds like it makes sense because you're building on each movement. I mean, it'd be like like when they shoot movies and all of a sudden they shoot the end of the movie. The first scene is like the end of the movie. It's like, well, okay, I don't know how everybody adjusts their brain, but if you're trying to be creative and play this kind of music, it makes total sense to go from 1 to 4, right?
It did, and at the end we were spent. We went through that journey. I do remember Colin Clausen, the pianist, and hopefully he doesn't get mad at me. The last tune, we did a couple where we scrapped it a minute in because of like some different time changes, and he like left out a roar of some profanity and upsetness and got out of the system, and then we laid down the best track of the period. And after that, I was like, that's it. We're done, guys. We're not, no more.
So did you do it? Did you do it in one day? Is that how you went through?
We did. We spent one day at Electrical and just kind of recorded for, taking breaks and stuff. But I think it was overall, we were there, started recording to end, was about 5 hours or so.
Wow. Okay.
Not straight, breaks and everything, but.
Yeah. Well, it's so when you're writing something like this, right, you're talking about the Wizard of Oz, but you're really talking about a journey. You start talking about kind of like the beginning of the journey and then the middle of the journey and then trying to get to the end of the journey and finalizing the journey and all that stuff. But I mean, theme wise, thematically wise, compositionally wise, I mean, you're obviously, you're not thinking about music from the Wizard of Oz. So, I mean, conceptually, how are you coming up with like melodies? And then you have a lot of odd time signatures in this. I mean, there's a groove in 10, you're doing different things like that too. So are these tunes that you've been messing around with on your own or just playing around with ideas and then you put the composition together and brought it in to the group? I mean, what's your process like for that?
Well, I'm constantly writing. I'm just writing all the time. And then if we look at bright side of the pandemic, I wrote a ton of things. Even there was just like little ideas, if it was a measure or a rhythm or whatever. So I'm constantly going back, and I have what I call the junkyard on my computer, just all these finale files where I just pull up and take that and put it together. So I have a lot to work with. This one, though, I was kind of trying to, again, I go back to the classical thing of like, where you state the main theme in the beginning and it kind of comes throughout the whole thing until you kind of finish up. So I was kind of thinking of it more like that. And I've accepted the fact that I'm good with the fact that I'm more modern jazz. And in there, I'm mixing in a lot of elements of, funk and stuff that doesn't swing. So I kind of was trying to think of that style. And when we do go to weird time signatures, is it going to a weird time signature just to do that, or does it serve a purpose? And does it also, is it there where you're listening to it and like, yeah, this is cool, but this feels weird? I think a lot of times, unless you're sitting there actually counting or whatever, you're not even going to know that it's doing that, because we're trying to do it so that it's like not kind of, how do I say it, hit you over the head just for the fact of doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it actually, the groove, if you didn't know it was in 10, you wouldn't know it was in 10. I mean, it just feels natural, to your point, right? It feels natural. And, you know, when you're talking about the different styles, and, you know, we talked a little bit before we came on, but I say this with a lot of guests, especially a lot of guests that are in your generation, which is somewhat my generation too. But I mean, you know, we grew up, we were influenced by jazz for sure. But my first influence was like, you know, Led Zeppelin, Iron Maiden, Grateful Dead, all of that stuff. And then I found Miles Davis and went backwards and learned everything else. And that was all during high school and pre-high school and all that stuff. So you're influenced by all of this, but that helps you, especially you, Shawn Maxwell, as a composer, an arranger, and a player. Everything has to come out of your music because it's the natural process. So it's like, I don't go to see somebody play jazz necessarily. I go to see Shawn Maxwell play. I don't, you know, I go to see Chichito Valdez was just at the showcase, right? I just saw that's who I went to see, or I went to see Bobby Broom, or I'm going to see them because I want to hear their voice. I want to hear their compositions. I want to hear what they're doing. I think that's where jazz is now, but of course that's where blues is. That's where rock is. That's where pop is. That's where everything is. So I hear, you know, from one step to another, and obviously I've heard all your recordings. I don't remember them all by, you know, from memory. I'm sorry, but don't quiz me. Don't quiz me. But you know, I hear the natural progression, and with this, I hear your voice completely, you know, all of the different styles, all of the different experiences you have are coming out in these compositions.
Well, cool. Thank you. That's the goal. And if I offend the jazz police by saying this, amen to what you just said. When I stopped worrying about I have to sound like this or do that, you know, a handful of albums ago, again, sounds weird to say, I've become myself. And as much as I still listen and study and love the jazz giants that came before me, I don't want to sound like them. And I think some of them who have been passed away a long time ago, if they were around now, they wouldn't be doing what they were doing then. So I think I got to jazz a little later than you. It wasn't until college till I even knew what the heck it was. But yeah, I was big into, you know, rap and rock and classical and everything else. And I feel in all of my recordings, but especially in this one, you get an element of that. Now, are we actually rapping? No. No one wants to hear me do that. But I mean, there's elements of it. And I think that along with the elements of the jazz and what I do like, you know, there's a lot in there. Like, you're not going to hear Cannonball Adderley kind of stuff in here, but he's a huge influence on me. And if you listen really closely, there are hints and stuff in there. It's just kind of mixed in there for better or for worse with more Shawn Maxwell on it.
Well, and it's you, right? I mean, that's going to naturally come out. You're not sitting around saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to play a cannonball lick right here. And then I'm going to play. Yeah, I mean, you know, give me a break. I mean, this is coming out of you. This is your voice, and it's the natural progression of everything. And, you know, so you can hear it throughout. So, you know, going from one step to another, to another, to another, by the time you get to Answer and Arrival, you know, just talk about, because it feels like to me, it's like a release at the end of this whole thing, right? I mean, you guys really let loose, and it just like releases. Do you perform this live, and how difficult? Because I know you've been touring and stuff, you know, you're playing these tunes and you're playing them live, and every night has to be different, but it's also got to be changing every night since the time you recorded it, right? Because you're just getting more and more, there's more ideas flowing, I'm sure. And it's just more and more interaction happening. I mean, how has this changed since the last time you recorded it to now?
Well, like you said, every tune evolves eventually. The good thing is this core group that I've been playing with, Colin Clausen doing keys, Michael Barton on bass, and Greg Essick on drums, we've played a ton together, like even leading up to the pandemic. And in the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been on the road quite a bit, which is awesome. So it's never the same, but it's hard to explain. We've just got a good core together where we're just great with communicating with each other, like not, hey, we're going to do this and do that. We're just playing and following wise. I mean, so it's evolved a bit, but it's still the same. And of course, like anything, like you said, if we're playing it the exact same way every gig, something's wrong.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's then there's no spirit of jazz in there. But I don't know. I just think the group is so tight now because we've done so much, and we just know how to communicate each other on all of my stuff, that it's pretty similar every time, if that makes sense.
Makes a ton of sense. So I should mention you've got the CD release coming up April 14th at the venue in Aurora. Of course, tickets will be at ShawnMaxwell.com. I'll just send everybody over there. The new release is on ShawnMaxwell.com. And you know what, man? This is exciting. You just keep turning out great music and cranking along. I'm sure there's going to be dates being announced after the release show on April 14th. So we'll stay tuned for that. But man, congratulations on this. And it sounds wonderful, man. It sounds wonderful.
Thank you. I always appreciate it, man. So thank you for having me on.
Everybody go check that out. And of course, as I always say, all things Chicago Jazz on ChicagoJazz.com. And until next time, hopefully I will see you somewhere out on the scene.